Hello and welcome to you all. My name is Daniel Knowles. I'm a correspondent at The Economist, currently in Chicago. I'm a Midwest correspondent, but I've worked in multiple places. I've been covering tech kind of on-off for the paper for most of the almost 10 years that I've worked there. And today we are discussing Game On, investing in esports. And I've got to thank the Global Esports Singapore 2021 for hosting this convention. So just a quick convention conversation, just a quick few housekeeping items. So we recommend using Google Chrome to watch this webinar, although I imagine it will probably work on any browser. And you'll find the full biographies of all the speakers to the right of your screen. There's also a box with a selection of further reading available for download. So just to introduce, we have come through a couple of difficult years for the world, but terrific years for the gaming industry. And I think people are probably more excited about what can happen in video games at the moment than perhaps they have been, since any time, maybe the early video game boom in the 1980s. I'm not sure, but people are spending more. They're spending more time playing games, and gaming is transforming. No longer do you buy a video game on a disc and put it into your games console and just play it. They're constantly evolving series, which change over time, which have completely different business models, and it's no longer just about the people playing. There is a new industry of what we're interested in, say, esports. People watching other people play games and playing them in competitive teams. There are, the entire kind of investors as diverse as people like Drake and David Beckham, as well as private equity, seeing opportunities in this, trying to make this more to see where this evolves, and it's all very exciting. So with us today we have Jamie Hanna, who is the deputy head of investments and capital markets at VanEck. He provides portfolio management and capital market trading across VanEck's passive solutions, including they have a global esports fund, which invests in various, gives people a way to reach the esports industry. We have Scott Rupp, who is the founding general partner of Bigcraft Ventures. He is an interactive entertainment entrepreneur. He's been essentially in this world for 20 years. We have Sean Son from PUBG India, which is the CEO of PUBG India and been instrumental in getting PUBG. I think it is PUBG, isn't it? I sort of know it as Player Unknown Battlegrounds, which I feel like it hasn't been for a while, but it's into the sort of mobile market in India, and I know it's now incredibly popular, not just in India, but across various parts of the world, perhaps where you don't necessarily think of as being, kind of gaming hubs. And then we have Adrian Lismore, who is on the Global Esports Federation. He's a technology entrepreneur, he's a founding member of the Global Esports Federation, and is a kind of long-time investor in tech and in gaming. And then finally, but definitely not least, we have Lisa Cosmos Hansen, who's the president of Nico Partners, which is a market research firm that looks at the Asia gaming market and its consumers. So all here today, all very interesting people to talk about this sector. So I thought I'd start with a question that on the surface is quite simple, but actually perhaps isn't, which is, how, when we talk about esports, what are we talking about? Let's just describe that. Let's imagine a typical Economist reader who might not necessarily follow this world that closely. Perhaps we could start with Adrian. How would you define esports?
That's a very broad question. I consider sort of the esports sector. If you look at most people who look at it, they would say, okay, is it gaming? Is it the two players professionally or amateurly playing video games? Is that esports? That's the typical definition that people will talk about when they talk about esports. But then you have to ask yourself: is it more broad than that? Does it include active esports, like technology that involves actual physical movement beyond around your traditional either on the console or otherwise. But then actually, when I look at it, it actually means the metaverse. It includes crypto. It includes NFTs. It includes a whole scheme of technology associated. So it's a very broad definition from where I sit.
Anyone else want to comment on that? I mean, I feel like I would have thought of it as games being played competitively in a sort of manner of sport. But then obviously that's broad as hell. So perhaps Scott, you seem like you're ready to go.
Yeah, I would agree with Adrian. I think a broader definition is appropriate. It's been, I think, one of the hindrances of esports, right? It's sort of like, would you define all of sports just by the kind of tier 1 pro tier? The answer is clearly no, right? Like, I think esports has been skewed by people's visual impression of it as these kind of stadium level events. But I think in reality, it's everything around competitive multiplayer gaming, whether it's playing, competing, socializing, consuming content, culture around it, the streamers around it. So I'm in favor of the broader lens, as Adrian is.
And so, when I was a kind of teenager and very into video gaming, the sort of competitive gaming world was limited to sort of StarCraft, which we all, which you knew was broadcast on television in kind of Korea, but not really at home. And maybe you had a bit of the occasional kind of TV show on cable TV that you could find that would show some video games. But the idea of sort of people playing, even though every other kind of 15-year-old like me was probably playing Counter-Strike or Half-Life or whatever, but kind of competitively online, the idea that this would become a whole industry in itself, with teams and professional players and franchises and stadium events, perhaps seemed a bit unimaginable. But that's where we are now. But this is still a very new industry. So I'm kind of wondering, what next? How is this? Where is it going to evolve to next? And what do you all think are the most interesting things happening in, let's say, the high level competitive space of esports? Let's say the tier 1 sort of player gaming, whether League of Legends or Call of Duty or Valorant or Overwatch, all these sort of things that have become, attracting these huge audiences. I'd like to know, where does it go next? Where will the teenagers of today, when they reach, their 30s like I am, what will they be surprised by? And perhaps we could go for Sean for that, or Jamie. I don't know. Sorry. Let's start with Sean. I asked him first.
I mean, maybe Damien want to. Hello. Okay. Anyway, so I think that we are seeing lots of small and growing platforms for esports. I can see that in India and also other regions, especially for Battlegrounds Mobile India, which is the new version of PUBG Mobile for Indian market. We are seeing over 100 events per day, which officially get authorization or approval from our side. So maybe there are 3 times or 5 times more events that are happening in India only. So I think that because of the development technology and because of more startups who are tapping into the market, I think that there will be more smaller maybe, but more large numbers of events are happening, which is caters to younger age people and maybe who haven't really played competitively, who haven't played games competitively before, but now there are more number of people are doing this at this moment.
Go ahead, Scott. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say, it's kind of to answer where it's going. I think it's important to ask where did it all begin, right? And I think in some ways it's a misperception that esports is a new thing, right? It's gotten a lot of media attention lately, but it's not that new. And in fact, like, you could even argue that it started back in the arcades in the 70s, right? Like where I grew up, because what was going on, right? That was a bunch of kids standing around watching each other play and compete around a game. And that's what esports is, right? It's play, watch, compete, socialize around a game. And I think what's really changed is a lot of incredible catalysts, most of them technology, right? It was broadband and live streaming and smartphones and multiplayer games and free-to-play games. Like that's just transformed this pretty simple human impulse around, play, watch, compete, socialize around games into this big, massive scale networked behavior. And so where does it go from here? I think it has a couple of interesting catalysts coming. Like one, I really am excited about what's possible through mobile esports, right? Because then esports can become very participatory at the grassroots. It's easy for people to get together and share those games and share those experiences. Everybody has them in their pockets. So I think you'll start to see kind of a much bigger bottom of the pyramid, so to speak, that feeds up into esports. And then also, everybody kind of overuses the term metaverse, but I think some of these technology changes that are coming ahead of us, VR and AR, we are going to start to see, I think, mixed reality competitive esports on those environments. And, it's not crazy to imagine V-sports, where it's kind of the ultimate mental and physical athlete, who's running around on the base of a stadium, competing in a virtual environment, against other super athletes, and everybody kind of watching this live on, live streams and Jumbotron. So I think that the imagination can take us to some pretty wild places.
Scott, I'd like to kind of echo that. That what you're talking about there is actually happening today. One of the companies that have partnered with the Global Esports Federation here is, for example, a company, Arcadia, out of Canada, Arcadia TV. They use interactive media, a Tron-like, I know they will hate me for using that. I'm dating myself probably, but we're professional athletes. We had LeBron James and we had gamers in the same space, where the gamer, you would in a basketball type of arena where they're dodging effectively Tron-like character inside of a video game that's in sort of that mixed reality is here today. And in fact, what you found was the gamer often performed better than the professional athlete, much to the chagrin of LeBron at the time. So it's not necessarily about physical skills; it's about the combination of those physical skills and mental skills.
Yeah, interesting. Please go ahead, Lisa. Sorry.
I think that another exciting aspect that's on the horizon is the continuation of, the global nature of esports. I believe it's one of these great unifiers. The globalist in me wants it to be one of these great unifiers for the world, especially in all the time in front of us right now. But as we look at it as a medal event in the 2022 Asia Games or in the SEA Games of the past, or potentially at the Olympics, this brings it in front of a whole broader audience of people of different ages who may or may not have ever heard of, PUBG or anything. And they probably would then say, wow, this is a medal. How is this a sport? And it opens people's eyes and ears to the notion of how truly competitive this is as a sport. And I think when we see that, and we see the universities having degree programs or scholarships or esports teams, and it's, part of the NC2A, these types of things, I think really catapult esports forward. At the same time, as I very much share the opinion of mobile esports for the mass market, broadening the bottom of the pyramid, as Scott said, I think that is a total reality, where you could have pickup esports tournaments just, like in a car dealership while you're waiting to get your car tuned up, or at a Starbucks or anywhere. There are experiential invitations waiting for people to participate in this phenomenon of esports. So, it's the people's fascination is peaked when there's a lot of well-known brands sponsoring different esports events, or if they're watching their favorite streaming platform and seeing their favorite streamer go for it. But I think when it gets to the level of the Olympics or the Asia Games, or even top universities competing, it becomes even like higher focus for the audience at large to enjoy.
So I'd like to move on from that, because I think you all make a very persuasive case about this kind of evolving industry and how much bigger and wider it's going to get, and the number of people who haven't yet thought about video gaming who will get drawn into it. But what I've been wondering about, is this is a very this is a bit as a business model. This is in flux, and you have teams that are being franchised and games that are being franchised. But you had, I saw recently we have the new Halo game being launched, and Microsoft is sort of working on a completely different model to try and bring in, esports teams into that, of kind of sharing rights or money from selling in-game cosmetics, that kind of thing. And I'm going to direct this to start with Hannah, sorry. But I think you all have stuff to say. How do we investors make money in specifically esports, I suppose, as distinct from just gaming in general? Don't the kind of games publishers have control over this? And isn't it sort of pretty dangerous to get into when people change the games they're playing so frequently?
So look, I think from a traditional sense, in terms of the average investor who would buy an investment fund or invest some of their retirement savings, they certainly had a little bit more of a concern of investing directly into esports. Their only real concerns around this are around liquidity. Can I buy and sell my position that I hold? Can I get in and out? And is it diversified? Or am I completely exposed to one particular esports team? And by and large, the demographic that will invest will be primarily under 30 if you focus on one particular esports team. So to attract a wider audience of investors into this, we need to focus on broadening out the whole entire ecosystem, because a lot of the investors are looking for a good return that will grow over a number of years. And esports is on everyone's radar at the moment, and not just esports, but gaming in particular. And so it's a long-term structural trend. And, this is something that spans over a 30-year period. Nothing just happens. This is, as was alluded to earlier, this takes a long time. It's not a new phenomenon. So these type of things over many years build up, and esports, whilst it's been around for many years, it's now on people's radar, and it will continue to grow. So people want a part of that. And look, from our perspective, we launched an esports and gaming fund in the US in 2018. We've since launched it in Europe and now in Australia. And over the last few years, it's taken over nearly $2 billion in assets. So it's certainly not just your young investor investing in this. There are certainly retirees and all of that looking to get a part of this new structural growth trend that they're looking for. So we have to make sure that when we build out this product and this fund, that it's diversified. So to do that, we don't necessarily just invest into an esports team. We want to invest in the whole entire ecosystem of esports. So that includes everything from the actual, the graphics card like NVIDIA, AMD that produce the actual gaming chips on the back. We want the actual publishers. So, Activision Blizzard. We want the likes of Roblox. We want the likes of actually just straight game producers like CD Projekt, for example. And the reason is we have to do this so that we can build out the diversification within it. If we went just with one, it would cause an issue. So, for example, if we just invested in Activision Blizzard, they had a particularly bad year last year. They've got a lot of press, which I'm sure everyone here would know about from a few cultural problems within the firm. And CD Projekt, for example, whilst it's straight gaming, their Cyberpunk 2077 had a lot of glitches. But at the same time, offsetting some of those losses were things like Roblox, which had an amazing year. AMD and NVIDIA, the chips actually had a fantastic year. So by building out the whole entire ecosystem, we're able to attract the more traditional investors. We're able to attract retirees, but we're able to attract people who want to be a part of it. And the esports is really the piece of the puzzle which adds the extra growth area to an already booming industry.
Perhaps you could come in on this, Scott, because you're sort of Bitcraft, you guys are more on the venture, more on the slightly speculative investment side, aren't you? So,
yeah, I mean, one way to invest in esports, I guess, is to short baseball. It's sort of like the old Warren Buffett joke, like it's terrible to invest in cars, but you could have done great shorting the horse. I think what you're poking at, though, I think is a fair point. It's like, yes, this is a massive behavior shift and consumer phenomenon, but how do you really play it? One of our portfolio companies has an esports ETF called Nerd, and their holdings are very similar to what Jamie cited. It's Tencent, Logitech, and now Krafton, and a lot of the publishers. And so for us, we have tried to bet on esports actually by betting on the next wave of publishers that we think are building the highly spectatable, competitive multiplayer games that can be the next wave of esports, right? Like what's going to be the next PUBG, the next League of Legends, and like typically what you see in gaming is every couple of years there comes a kind of massive scale genre defining game that's a little bit new, a little bit of an evolution on a mechanic that people liked before, but was with a twist. And so that's kind of where we're fishing, I would say, primarily. Beyond that, I think there are other pockets of opportunity. Esports betting, I think, is an interesting place where you can potentially get some exposure. I think nobody yet has really cracked that sort of amateur esports ecosystem. I mean, these are maybe not the most like VC profile plays, but if I'm a parent and spend an ungodly sum of money on my kids ice skating and skiing, and soccer camps and all this stuff, and you haven't really built a huge business around esports for that yet, and it should be there because the sort of youth demand to participate in those things is massive, and it sort of has the added appeal to parents of become sort of a backdoor to coding and STEM education and getting into programming and things like that. So it's not an easy answer, but I think you can find your places. And I think the fundamental thing to avoid is it's just that publisher choke point at the end of the day. That sort of single point of failure or margin squeeze or vulnerability. It's hard to kind of nibble around the margins for that.
And Lisa, this is an Asia event. You follow Asia. What do you think of the most kind of in esports? I think probably had its earliest beginnings. A lot of it was in Asia. Where do you think are the most interesting hotspots in the region? What should we be getting excited about? What's unexpected? Which countries? Which kind of demographics? I don't know.
Well, yeah, Asia, I think, we consider it the global center of esports, and so many developments in esports started in Asia, and country by country, you can see examples of some fascinating trends that have taken hold. I've long said that gamers in Asia are motivated to play games overall by the 4 C's. Community, competition, challenge, and completion. And those 4 C's really are encapsulated by esports. So it's no wonder why esports is such a vibrant part of games culture overall throughout Asia, if those motivators that we've researched and found through segmentation analysis and so forth are what gamers in Asia really use as the basis of gaming. So when we think about what's going to happen with gaming in Asia, we can see esports is a major driver of all gaming adoption, no matter if it's a game played in esports or not. gamers are highly motivated by these characteristics, and the lessons from esports fall into all of them. So when we look at Asia, we see things that are fascinating, like India. India is just, it's like a giant whiteboard waiting for someone to write on it. I'm so excited for Sean and his team to be part of that, because it's just amazing. It's this perfect opportunity to define what will be India's games market, what will be India's esports environment. Regulations are still being crafted and so forth. When we talk about regulations, of course, China, where we spend a great deal of our time at Eco Partners, we cover all these countries in Asia, but China is, of course, a meaty market, and we watch the regulations there kind of sometimes suppress some of the growth in what the esports world could be. But esports is a giant part of China, and it's not going away. And I think any kind of esports company worth its salt will have a strong consideration of how they can interact with China or take advantage of it. You could just watch like the League of Legends Worlds when Edward Gaming won, and it was just so exciting. It was just like, it was like the NBA Finals and the World Series and the Super Bowl all rolled into one for so many of these young people throughout China. And that enthusiasm in a country of so many people is really just like, it's just magnetic. And then we look at Japan, and Japan is exciting because it's kind of a more developed games market, but had been a little hamstrung by its own regulations, especially on esports, categorizing some of this winnings as gambling and things to that effect. Now those regulations have been loosened, and there's a lot of opportunity. I mean, I eagerly await the day where, apart from the fighter games, which are already popular in esports, but some other games and genres that come out of Japan naturally that they developed there can be developed with the intention of esports. Now, the community defines an esports title, there's no doubt about that, but a developer can have some intentionality around their hopes and dreams for some of their games. And I think as soon as Japan and their developers jump into this with both feet, there's a lot of opportunity there. And then the last country I'll mention is Indonesia. I think Indonesia is has an explosive growth opportunity as well. And I know from a lot of our clients and people we talk to, we have an office in Jakarta. There's a lot of government support for esports in Indonesia. There's been growth in Indonesia for esports, even during the pandemic year when the other Southeast Asian countries were kind of suffering from no live arena-based kind of esports tournaments. Indonesia still managed to find a lot of gold nuggets to hold on to, I suppose. And so I think that these countries that I mentioned have a lot of opportunity, but I'm very bullish on all of Asia when it comes to esports.
Sure, perhaps you can tell us. I'd like to know, in India, where you have had this enormous rise in access to the internet in the past kind of 5 or 6 years with geophones and everything like that, kind of going from like tens of millions to hundreds and hundreds of millions of people getting online for the first time, and a lot of them are playing PUBG and other things as well. But I'd like to know, who describe to me like a PUBG user in India, and what and what that, how they're playing it. I guess I'd like. What's distinctive about gamers in India?
So I think, as you mentioned, that after the Geo's mobile internet infrastructure penetration happens, people start looking for, people started to looking for what to enjoy on with that infrastructure. So they found OTT, YouTube, online literature. All of them are very interesting, and they spend lots of time there. And gaming has been, based on my understanding, gaming has been a little slow in adaptation to those people. And when PUBG Mobile was introduced to the market, the size of this app itself was very huge in India standard. It's over 1 gigabyte, which is like 10 times bigger than other gaming apps in the market. But due to the very low data plan fee, so they could easily download it, and they started enjoying it. And as just Lisa mentioned, Asian people have more keen to enjoy the games with friends. I mean, I think it's same thing globally, but maybe in Asia, infrastructure for like traditional sport is not very well developed in especially in rural area or tier 2, tier 3 cities. So I think PUBG Mobile has provided such sort of play field for Indian gamers to play together. So I think that's the main reason why PUBG Mobile was that hugely successful back then. And then just more people are enjoying the games. I mean, not just PUBG Mobile, Free Fire, our main competitor, is also enjoying a lot of traction during last couple of years. And also there are more games, Call of Duty Mobile and more multiplayer mobile games are trying to crack the market. So I think, I cannot really think any other direction but to steep growth in the market in terms of multiplayer game mobile platform.
And Adrian, I just wonder, as the head of the Global Esports Federation, just kind of hearing about how people are playing games and what you said earlier about kind of how we define esports. Does the term kind of esports, which brings a comparison with sports to people's minds, make sense when actually the way people are following this is not necessarily the way that they follow a football team or a cricket team or whatever. It is, as Sean was just describing, people who kind of, often are sort of following, I don't know, maybe one sports player on YouTube, and then, there's a whole kind of world of more individualistic sort of gaming. How is that gonna work, I suppose?
Well, that's a broad question. I mean, I mean, we have 104 member state federations that are part of our Global Esports Federation and growing. We have our Singapore Games, which is a country against country flag for your national pride here in Singapore in December. And we have sort of a series of events throughout the year, which is what we call our Global Esports Tour, which is professional and semi-professional teams competing for prize money throughout the different games. Whether it's we had in Riyadh last month. We had PUBG, and we had 16 teams on stage, our first live event, if you will. We moved to Dubai, and we brought in a different game there. So we're trying to broaden and access sort of a broad scope of both gaming, mobile and non-mobile esports in traditional sense that you talk about here. So you're talking about the League of Legends of this world, etc. But then more broadly, we have partners that we are encouraging. We work with the sort of UNESCO, ITU, the international sports federations that are part of which are both traditional sports and esports, have a foot in both and are wondering, they're not quite as advanced as like FIFA might be, for example. But how does FIS, which is the ski federation, how does it engage with mobile gamers or gamers, et cetera, et cetera? It does that through partnerships with entities like Session. Session Games is a mobile game for esports. World Taekwondo. How does World Taekwondo or World Karate engage with the same demographics? There, they partner with other technology firms, Refract Technologies out of Singapore, for example. They have interactive gaming technology with licensed and working with those international sports federations to broaden the access. Someone gave me a statistic that said, I think it was the guys at Session, they said that when people play mobile games of a particular sport, so outside of a PUBG, outside the fantasy, sort of a fantasy type environment, but traditional sports, they engage with the traditional sports, they find that about 10% of the users stick with the actual sport. So if you're a skiing federation or an archery federation and wondering how do I engage with the demographics and the consumer of tomorrow, what better way than to engage digitally to engage and bring that user into a real world, or maybe that hybrid world that Scott talked about earlier of mixed reality, which I'm a big believer of. And then that mixed reality is all about the metaverse and the consumption of other products. So your skins, your in-game purchases, how do I transfer them? How do I buy and sell them? Does that link into blockchain, crypto? So we as a federation, I sit as the vice chair of our Monaco-based foundation, which is a charitable entity. So we invest in endemic participants in the sector, and we look at it very broadly, from our partnership with Flare, which is a blockchain and democratization and crypto component, through to PUBG, Mobile, Tencent, et cetera, who are some of our partners as well, but also UNESCO and the standards that were written for protection online. Have asked the Global Esports Federation to lean in on that and to work with the publishers, etc. So you look at platforms, you look at the whole ecosystem, and that for us is esports.
And you mentioned something that I very much want you all to talk about, which is crypto, because cryptocurrency, NFTs, that whole world is something that people in gaming, in the gaming industry, gaming investment are very excited about at the moment. But I wonder, how does it actually work? How do you own something, a skin on the blockchain? Doesn't it still have to be sort of embedded? Doesn't it still have to a developer design it and embed the code into their game? How is all this kind of like metaverse, crypto sort of DeFi world going to actually work in gaming in practice? And what, for people who are invested in that, and who might want to make money off publishers and so on as well, how does it all benefit the investors as well as benefit the consumers? I'm interested in both sides. Who does it really work for, this crypto stuff?
And the blockchain technology is obviously here to stay. There's no doubt whether or not people think Bitcoin's going up or down. The technology that underlies all of this is here. It's the same with NFTs. And so, embedding the type of crypto payments or crypto rewards inside of games is certainly something that will happen. It already is. As well as NFTs, people can obviously buy their skins, an original skin that's an NFT, so that, they can obviously then own that only one within the game and then be able to sell it at some point in the future. But, the question is, this is happening. It is already there. And I know a lot of the people already on this call would be able to add a lot more detail into it. But from an investment point of view, there is just general growth in this sector. There's just general growth, and interest across the globe. And it's becoming more institutionalized. So as crypto and blockchain technology is rolled out into more aspects of our life, esports is going to get picked up with that, and it's going to be at the forefront of it. So, it's not a pseudo investment into some form of crypto or NFT investment, but esports is the lead in this, and it will dictate how, we start using this as a first mover advantage for the rest of us in our lives.
How does it actually improve gaming though? Can we, Scott, you seem ready to speak.
I mean, I'll answer that one. If you don't mind, I'll pick up on Jamie's thread a little bit too. I mean, I think the core challenge for esports, and it relates to like, where do you invest? Core challenge has been like, what's the business model, particularly for these esports teams? Are they really going to be able to scale and have margin? Are they too vulnerable to the publishers? And I think the theory of the case on how the esports teams models could get better, there was always sort of two big home runs. Like, one was that the teams kind of got their act together and held the line in unison against some of the publishers and said, look, our brands matter, our audience matters. If you want us competing in your game, we need a piece of the game revenue. You've seen some cracks in the armor with some other games about that. So that is one big hope. The second one is they have huge audience scale over these video platforms, but they just don't monetize it very well. They're just participating in this, low value kind of remnant inventory. And so there's always been some experimentation around like, how do you develop some sort of a freemium direct consumer business on top of your esports fandom. And I think that's where some of the promise of crypto kicks in, where you can imagine NFTs, right? It's just another way for people to express their fandom, like the NFTs, tomorrow's like, and teams can start to kind of essentially architect fan clubs and privileges and premium spectating experiences and premium access to the players using NFTs, right? And if they can find a way to tap into the audience scale that they have through something like that, that could help on the business model side. I think the other way that this really can potentially get big for the esports teams is, there will be the next wave of competitive esports games that are blockchain-based games. And kind of the core challenge for any new game is discovery, right? And that was always, a place where the esports teams had a strong hand to play, like, hey, we can help your competitive multiplayer game break out. Well, if there's a new, fast forward 5 years, competitive multiplayer game that's got a crypto-based economy, those game developers can start to incentivize the esports teams with tokens, to participate in the upside of those games. So I think there's some big upside there potentially for the teams.
And is it? Okay, please go ahead, Lisa. Sorry.
I think just a small comment at a more macro level. When we pull back and we say what's going on with the blockchain games, it's play to earn, right? And if we say what's going on with esports, it's compete to earn. If you're going pro, play to earn if you at any level. And what you're earning kind of depends on your level and so forth. But it's kind of one's born out of the other, where the idea of, especially with some, in some of the lower disposable income economies, we were fascinated by the pickup in the Philippines of Axie Infinity, a game out of Vietnam. And now the AXS token is it's highly traded, right? And when we see things like this happen, you start to recognize, wow, this was an opportunity for some citizens of a country with, on average, lower disposable income to take part in this play to earn kind of movement. And I think that there is opportunity. I'm a market observer, market analyst. I'm not a developer of these types of things, but I think there's an opportunity to recognize where an unknown hole gets filled by something like the Axie Infinity experience. What does that mean? There's a yearning for this play to earn opportunity, and then how does that intersect with or how does it get overlaid with esports, which is known to be attractive throughout economies big and small? So there's something where at like a human level or an economic level, this combination will be very powerful going forward.
I can almost guarantee you in the next couple of years, you'll see a DAO get established that owns an esports team, a community-owned team. This is the other fun part about esports. Like, it really is the tip of the spear of change in consumer entertainment technology, consumer behavior more broadly.
Yeah, but I'm not a seller of baseball, like you said at the beginning. I'm definitely not a seller of baseball. I've heard that argument so many times, and I'm just not a seller of baseball.
I just want to push a bit more on Axie Infinity, because I've been following that for a while, and I have been wondering, as a gamer, more than as a sort of business journalist, I suppose, what actually the fun of it is. It feels like it's sort of like gold mining in Warcraft was, 10 years ago, only I'm not sure who the other side of the ledger is. At least with Warcraft, you can see that people are buying, maybe want to be able to skip all that sort of tedious fighting to get the fancy sword, and so would buy the gold. But why, with something like Axie, with all these blockchain games, why, if they're play to earn, how are the people who are earning, how's the other side doesn't that mean that the other side is people who are paying to win? Doesn't that make for a terrible gaming experience?
I don't want to hog the mic here. I'll take a quick crack at it, but I think you're right, Daniel. I think you're onto something. It's sort of like, I think we're in V1 of kind of play to earn economy design, right? You have to have more people who are playing for fun to pay out the people who are playing to earn. And I think you'll start to see some changes in the game design because of that very issue. I think the other way you can have a very healthy play to earn game is where the game itself is more like a kind of creator economy style game where sort of UGC creation is going on inside of the community, and some of those creators can be earning through the value of their creations that they're selling to other people. So I think it is a design question.
Well, perhaps let's move on and talk about kind of crypto in that world. Another big thing that's been happening last year, especially in one of the big Asian markets in China, has been this big government crackdown on gaming in general. And, I completely different place to China, but, of PUBG, I was in Afghanistan last year, which obviously has bigger problems now, but they had a crackdown on PUBG there. And, there are kind of concerns about governments, I think, especially about how much time kind of teenage boys, I guess mostly, but people are playing games, and how much of a threat is that to the industry? This kind of backlash against it if it keeps growing. And perhaps we'll start with Sean. You're on the front line there as working for PUBG.
Maybe as a game publisher, which are impacted by such government like policy or regulations, I cannot really say very freely in the topic, but I think that it's like, based on my experience with the Korean regulations and the history of such regulations, I think it's more like up and down. It's not, I think it would not be one direction that it will not get tougher and tougher for gaming companies, even in China. I mean, I think that there will be some correction or some modification, how the policy or regulation can benefit both gamers or public and also game publishers. So it's ironic that China's government introduced like tougher regulations around playing hours for teenagers, but at the same time, the Asian Games Committee for Hangzhou 2022, they also very enthusiastic about making esports as a regular sports for Asian games. So I think it's more like multi-dimensional things rather than one direction, which makes us game publisher or investor in industry tougher. So yeah, I hope, maybe I'm a little biased. I hope that things can be better for us.
Yeah. Adrian,
I'd like.
Jamie,
Yeah.
Sorry, you jumped again.
Oh, no, I was just literally going to add to what Sean was saying, is that from an investor point of view, it does damage the investment to some extent. You kind of only have to look at the performance of Tencent over the past year, and you'll see that's been particularly negative. So it might be good from a society point of view to try and limit teenagers' access to continue playing games at night time and the like. But from an investor's point of view, it does limit the opportunities available for growth. So what's more important? Well, obviously society is, but at the same time, you just have to understand that it will impact returns for investors.
Jamie, I think if you look at this from a long-term perspective, actually, versus a short-term trading perspective in the portfolio, it's a very different. You have a very different lens. So sitting from our position, where we're taking much longer views on things, we're looking at sort of the the relevant crackdowns of society that are for societal benefits, I would argue, actually as a positive thing on esports. It's creating some of the framework that's needed inside of the esports space, I would argue today. So the publishers' pendulum of control is being sort of tempered, if you will, by sort of some of the government issues that we've seen in terms of the crackdowns or the redirection, et cetera. But at the same time, it's being refocused on societal benefits, including, for example, we talk about what is this esports and technology involved, towards benefits like healthcare tech inside of gaming. And how do we bring that into the gaming platform? How do we monetize that? How does that become part of your portfolio? How does broadcasting, beyond sort of how do we consume it? Is it in the platform itself? And so, looking at it broadly, we look at it from a much longer perspective than that short term. Sure, Tencent is impacted by the Chinese crackdown, but its other businesses are doing well. Its thought process in other sectors, but it has equity ownerships or other investments or other that are focused on that broader spectrum will actually do better, and they will all come back long term. So I think it's a swings and roundabouts kind of scenario.
If you're talking about long term, I hear what you're saying, but we recently lowered our forecasts for the number of gamers that are going to be in China as a direct output of this recent 3-hour rule that the Chinese government has put in place for, youth under age 18 are limited to play 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And for many kids who are like age 7, age 8, they're going to be in bed by then. I'm a mother. I've got 2 teenagers. I don't want them on their screens that time of night unless they're doing their homework and whatever. So we see this as sort of like the Chinese government is saying they really want to support esports. Esports has a huge amount of investment in China, and it's a major driver of games industry in China. And I think it is definitely there to stay and grow in China. But the problem becomes in the out years of the forecast period, if you have fewer kids basically who are able to practice playing their games. And it's sort of like saying, go compete professionally in soccer or football without ever practicing more than an hour at night when you're a kid. A lot of kids will sort of lose interest in that type of competitive play. The only immediate change is that, it raises the age from 16 to 18 to compete. And it also limits some things with streaming video, reduces, the ability for young people to tip on streaming video. I think there's going to have to be some sort of compromise within China because there's a big push towards, say, the Asia 2022 Hangzhou Games. There's a big push towards esports overall. But then there's this dramatic message that they want the youth to really focus on being kids again and focusing on school. And it's not just games that have been cracked down on recently, technology, education, all kinds of different stuff in China. But where this all plays out with, how enthralled young people are, in the immediate term, the people who are in their teenage years now, when they become 18 and they can play for hours on end or go to college and do these things, that's not going to be the problem. But it's beyond that. When the kids who are currently 10, what are they going to be fascinated with by the time they're 18? Is this still going to be esports? It might be. Maybe they'll direct all of their attention into watching it on streaming video. But I'm not sure. We think that this is going to be a change in the way youth gamers engage with gaming in China, and as the biggest market in the world, that's going to impact other markets.
But legitimacy and prestige are elements that you're not, you're sort of focusing on. I would argue we're focusing on the tip of the kind of the iceberg here. So the more legitimate and prestigious the sport and the esports sector is, so then you've got President Xi at the Beijing 2022 Games wanting mobile gaming as part of the offer in China. That's a directive from the president himself. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's an encouragement, if you will. The OCA, which I was out at the meeting there in Dubai. I see this the Commonwealth Ambassador, the Commonwealth Games. We're going to have an event at the Commonwealth Games. We will have a multi-product event, first time ever inside, alongside the Commonwealth Games. So you've got this legitimacy of the sort of these large, broad international agencies and governments coming to the support of the community. And I would argue it's not, gamers aren't, I'm a gamer and I'm not a kid. I started with Pong. I still have my Pong set at home. For those who know what Pong is, but the gaming community is much broader than sort of that's the sort of demographic of an 8 or 10-year-old thing, and that legitimacy that an organization like the Commonwealth Games or the International Olympics or the Global Esports Federation bring, or UNESCO, UN, the ITU. That's what relaxes governments and says, you know what? This is in a safe pair of hands across this broader community that actually is a caring and nurturing community rather than a different type of environment. And that's growth and that's growing up. And I think the esports, the community more broadly, has to grow up. The COVID has accelerated the growth of esports without a doubt. And perhaps some of that has accelerated that should have been slowed down and managed better by the publishers. But because of the sort of influx of drinking out of a fire hose, they just didn't focus on it. And now they're focused on it because it's slowing down long-term economic growth for them. So now they're engaging with entities like UNESCO, like with the Global Esports Federation, and asking, how can you help us get our message across in a more efficient way with governments? And so that's a natural progression of the traditional sports worlds and esports.
A proper debate going here. It's great. Fantastic. Scott, what are you going to say?
Well, a little snarky comment. I would just encourage President Xi to watch Footloose sometime and sort of see what happens when you try to ban rock and roll and dancing. You tend to just make it cooler and more coveted. I don't want to minimize the challenge. I think particularly to kind of the pro esports scene in China, that's a real blow. But it's, I think, also important to note that there are winds blowing very much the other way in other parts of the world. The WHO came out in favor of gaming during COVID. I think it was the WHO, sort of seeing it as a way to promote connection between people. I think lots of parents saw that over the shoulders of their kids during lockdowns, and they're like, oh my gosh, Fortnite is not this antisocial, terrible thing. This is the digital playground keeping my high schooler sane and not entering into a spiral of depression. And sort of same thing, watching their kids play Roblox and realizing, hey, there's like role playing and mastery and test and learn problem solving going on here. This is actually pretty cool. And they might actually code and make a game. Even the World Economic Forum this week put out videos about play to earn gaming as a tool for economic development. So I think there's very much an element of generational grumpiness and misunderstanding here, the way there always is with every new form of entertainment. And I think as time rolls forward, and people who grew up with this are kind of our political leaders, I don't see this as a long-term threat to gaming. It may be in certain countries, but globally, I don't think so.
I was writing about this last year, I believe. It was one particular piece, but Victorians were very against baseball. Americans in the Victorian era, there was a whole baseball backlash. So I think you're probably right. It moves on. Cool. Well, we're moving towards the end of our time. I've got a few questions from our audience that I'm going to sort of put to you in a moment. I just want to maybe one more sort of point from me that Scott, you were leading us on to, which is, this has been a sector that has been kind of massively accelerated by the pandemic, by people being stuck at home, by not being able to go outside. And, I mean, maybe with Omicron and everything else, this is too optimistic to say it, but I do feel like slightly we're moving past that. How much of the energy is going to stay in it when people are allowed to go outside again, and when parents are able, are being more able to take their kids back to kind of conventional sports and that sort of thing. I mean, that's happening now. The energy, is it going to dissipate at all as we do finally progress more and more to normal, or not?
I can only talk about people I know, and obviously I'm a professional. I work in finance. It's quite a boring industry. But during lockdowns, for example, people legitimately were gaming more. Friends of mine, in their 40s were gaming. I myself bought a VR headset. And look, I have a young son. I would rather be playing with my son outside. But let's be honest, I couldn't. I was blocked from doing that. And as a result, Australia had some of the longest lockdowns. I bought an Oculus headset. And look, I still have that now. I will still play it, not as much as I did. And that's a personal example. And I know a number of friends who are also professionals. So it's kind of moved the playing of a lot of these games into an older generation, people rekindling what they had in the past. Suddenly, they're kind of forced to find something else to do at home. And look, there's only so many Netflix things you can watch. And gaming certainly has now integrated itself into an older population, I think. So I don't think it's just transient. I think it's here to stay.
Yeah, so just a couple of questions from the audience that I'm going to put to you guys, and I think maybe just leap in because, so the first one that I thought was interesting is, and briefly came up, I think in Adrian or somebody mentioned this, but basically gambling and esports, and how can we expect kind of gambling? The gambling has become a huge part of conventional sports in recent years. It's something that's accelerating in the US now. Can we expect that to begin becoming a thing in esports? And, the audience question says, can they find profitable synergies? I might add, is that a risk as well?
I think what's the opportunity that's particularly exciting in my view in esports betting is that it's not going to be just like betting on match outcomes the way you do in traditional sports. There's so many more opportunities around live in-play, social betting, what's going to happen next at this moment. And the sort of the esports fan is someone that will engage in that type of like live mobile social betting experience. So I think there's a big kind of betting product innovation opportunity there, not just esports as a new betting category.
I would echo Scott's comments there. We know what's happening today. Traditional betting, I think, is not. The statistics that as a community, as a federation, we welcome everyone from our across the esports sector into our community, and that includes betting companies and their views. And so we've listened a lot to what they're doing today and what their plans are for the future. And I think that some of the statistics that they threw out were the fact that in traditional betting scenarios, about 80% of the bets are bets about what occur in the next 10 minutes or 15 minutes of an event. Now you fast track that into esports, where you actually have technology, it's a different type of environment. You can imagine the acceleration that creates.
Why has it been that the sort of traditional gaming industry has come so late to the world's biggest population, given the size of India and the optimism about esports in India or gaming in India now? Why is it that sort of the traditional like games console manufacturers, the Segas and Nintendos and Sonys have been so slow to take advantage of that? Why is it firms, people like you with mobile apps that are sort of capitalizing on it?
Yeah, I may not answer that in a very full confidence, but I can just give you my opinion. I'm just being here like for 4 months now. So, but the thing is, there are sizable gamers community other than mobile platform. I mean, PC, console, there are sizable gamers community. But the thing is, I think it's not the issue with the market itself. It's more issue with the global companies who have kind of neglected the market with a certain perception. That's my belief. I mean, they're not. I tried to fix my Xbox in Bangalore. I couldn't find any official service center in Bangalore in any other city in India. So I think that's probably explained that they haven't invested properly in the first place, rather than the market has not matured enough. I mean, so now lots of global gaming companies like us and other like Western and Asian, Chinese mobile game or like global like PC or console game developers, but they want to sort of tap into the mobile gaming growth in India. They actually doing a lot of efforts here. So that's why I think they get the good sort of performance so far. So I would answer in that way rather than like market issue.
Well, thank you. So we're coming towards the end of our time. Got through the audience questions. So I think this has been super interesting discussion. I particularly enjoyed kind of Adrian and Lisa's argument over, crackdowns and the importance of it. Also the discussion of crypto. I think, how gaming evolves in the sort of and mixes in with these new, quite exciting, but also maybe quite speculative sort of world of crypto. I think we talked a bunch about how not just games, but also gaming business models might evolve there. So, and we, I think some of the little bits that we mentioned, how people's, Scott's kind of views on how people's views of gaming have changed because they see their kids playing, having been locked down with them and realizing it's not quite what they imagined. It's not quite the kind of, brainless sort of pointlessness that I think maybe an older generation who didn't grow up with video games sometimes think, and now they're realizing how social and interesting it could be. So there's a huge amount of really interesting stuff that we've all just discussed. And so I'd like to thank you all so much for being here. That was, again, we have Jamie Hanna, Scott Rupp, Sean Son, Adrian Lismore, and Lisa Hansen. And I'd like to remind the audience that there's a post-event survey which should be embedded in the audience console. So if you could all fill it in, that would be much appreciated. And finally, just once again to thank the Global Esports Games 2021 for generously hosting this discussion. And I hope you all enjoyed it.